If we all were to eat, say, 100% of what we need in terms of healthy diet, of that diet, our farms collectively can provide under 20%.
Okay, so if that's what they can provide, if we all eat well, two big ifs, what's our target? What do we hope they will be able to deliver in relationship to the food systems and the agricultural supports that we should be providing?
That's a tough one. I don't have a number, but I have an idea. The idea is that whatever we produce, we should be able to obtain here. So we do produce a lot more than we consume locally. A bunch of it actually leaves the region and never ends up in a lot of our neighborhoods. So that number I don't have right now on the top of my head.
You just gave it to us, 100%.
No, because I'm not giving up my coffee. I'm not giving up chocolate. I don't think it's a question of a single number. It's, as you put it, it's a continuous process.
Yeah, I think it scales in different ways. So one level of scaling is just policy change and achieving. So, a lot of the work that we do is around creating energy efficiency programs statewide that are accessible to a full range of homeowners, as well as new streams of reinvestment for low-income communities across the state. So that's advocacy, organizing, and we think of that as part of scaling. In terms of the physical scaling, I think it's got to be both. I think we're at the point on the west side, not just because of push, but because of a range of actors where the vacancy crisis is almost over as a crisis. There's still vacant housing on the west side, but that downward spiral of abandonment, has been stopped. With some pockets of exception. So I think for us it's about expanding our boundaries, 10 blocks at a time over a course of a few years, and then working with groups around the city to build their capacity. So there are some good things happening. For example, CAO has done a series of projects near the old Deaconess Hospital that have some elements of some of the same principles of walkability and density that we favor. There's some other groups elsewhere, in the Fruit Belt working on some of those principles as well. So for us, it's about being in conversation with those groups, being helpful where we can be, building up the relationships and building a movement.
Well, I thought the presentations were pretty amazing, and there were a lot of themes that come out that the Buffalo Green Code, which is the first comprehensive rewrite of the land use and zoning policies of the city over several decades, attempts to address. And there are even small things that even like Aaron mentioned, for instance, like the Corner Tavern, which is a Buffalo tradition that isn't recognized by our current framework of zoning. Like most cities, the Corner Tavern in a residential neighborhood was banned by zoning. To this day, a corner tavern in a residential neighborhood is not allowed without a variance. So many of them have disappeared over decades. The Green Code is allowing for some wiggle room to determine whether on a case-by-case basis a corner tavern might be able to return to the neighborhood. You go through the west side or the east side, the corner tavern was an institution. It's the third place where many folks in our neighborhoods met. Samina recognized, a part of our economy, the growing and producing and distributing of food, that has also disappeared as a result of zoning in many cases throughout Buffalo. The Buffalo's very first zoning code actually specifically allowed agriculture in 1925. In 1953, we had a very different view about things. Agriculture was not seen as an urban use. There's no mention of it whatsoever in the 1953 code, which is still in effect. We're going back to page 1 again. By allowing market gardens, community gardens, chickens, which are already allowed, but which we're recognizing as well. Beekeeping. I have a stick of lip balm in my pocket made from an apiary in a West Side backyard, not recognized by the current code, but which we're recognizing now. So we're moving away from what I think Bob called, perhaps the worst kind of formula-based planning, in which the complexity of the city was reduced to three basic uses: commercial, residential, and manufacturing. To a new code that hopefully recognizes to a larger degree the tremendous complexity and diversity of our neighborhoods. So those are just three things that I think that we have a strong relationship between what is perhaps the largest placemaking project we've had, certainly at the largest scale, a complete rewrite of our zoning code, and what a lot of other speakers mentioned.
Well, I think it starts with making more farms in urban areas like MAP. It works. It's not it's not impossible, as MAP shows. I think it starts there.
So make more farms in urban areas, okay. Rebecca?
I think, just going back to what all the speakers were saying earlier, is that it's essential that we continue to value the voices of people, the citizens, people who are affected by this. So always starting with the community. The community includes youth. Lamar is here with me. He's one youth perspective, but there are however many youth there are in our city, and inviting them in, finding ways for them to have a place at the table, just as all of you now are having a place at the table in terms of the citizen planning school. And I think, going back to the power that push develops in people, in neighborhoods, and the importance of placemaking and the establishing a sense of place in our communities that is not disconnected from policy and planning initiatives, but rooted in the people that are there. I think that will always be critical, and I think agriculture is a part of that, and the food system is a part of all of that, and a part of our planning efforts and our regional development, and recognizing the interdependence of that and the importance of people and the people that are in the places, including youth, is essential.
So we have estimated what we could increase in terms of self-reliance if every productive piece of land was to be used in food production. We have those estimates, but it'll still not get us to 100%. And part of that is also how we eat. So I already pointed out that only 25% of our bi-county population eats fruits and vegetables at the recommended levels. Most of us eat a lot of carbs, a lot of protein, but not enough fruits and vegetables. So our dietary patterns and how we allocate our land use pattern doesn't match.
Sure.
But in a perfect world, if we all somehow decided that Twinkies were not good for us and tomatoes were better, would we be able to do it based on our land resources? Not 100%. But with the ideas that you're proposing, with permaculture, extension of season, aquaponics, certainly more and more, but 100% does not seem feasible. But I wouldn't fixate on the 100%. We have so much lost opportunity that it's really important to recognize that. We have freight trucks going from our region, which is an apple producing region as well, that are coming from Washington State, bringing apples here, and then going back empty. And you go to a grocery store or a corner store on the east side of Buffalo, I will eat my hat if you can find a local apple there. I think that talking about the 100% is a way to stall the conversation, because that can't be done. I'd rather move us to thinking about what we can do. We've got 1,200 farms just in Erie County. Let's figure out how to get their produce into our communities.
Well, yeah, I think you're pointing to one of the really critical questions of our moment in Buffalo. As Buffalo gets hot, there's some great aspects to the idea that Buffalo is back and that there's a new energy here, but that also attracts people with dollar signs in their eyes, and it's going to increase speculation all over the city. And I think one of the fundamental structures that we need to expand are community-based land banks. Every community should have a structure, and this is to Bob's point of scaling up, a community development, a community-controlled entity that's able to bank land before it gets hot and gets into speculators' hands. The truth is, once it's in speculators' hands, if you have a whole neighborhood that's owned by speculators, you got to fight on your hands for years to get that back. I mean, the market is set up to respect private property. This is the United States of America. Once it gets into someone's hands, being organized helps. Being able to go to the housing court in an organized, strong way is going to help you, but ultimately, it's not easy to get it back from a speculator. So I think it's first and foremost about beating them to the punch and having structures at the community level that can get control of that land before it goes out to someone with dollar signs in their eyes.
I'm going to have something to add to that. Well, I'd love to talk to you about the Ellicott District Urban Renewal Project after the panel discussion, because it's a project that fascinates me historically. As you know, 36 blocks of wonderful mixed-use walkable neighborhood was demolished in the late 50s and early 1960s and was never rebuilt intentionally because planners at the time had very different ideas about the city. They didn't view the mixed-use walkable neighborhood that was there as a healthy place worth preserving. I think with the adoption of the Buffalo Green Code, we're finally turning the page on the urban renewal era. And it's not necessarily to cast judgment on the decisions of previous planners, but to recognize all the strengths that were in existence in our city 60, 70 years ago, building on those assets and recreating them in many ways. So under the next zoning code, it'll be possible for the first time to rebuild the walkable mixed-use neighborhoods where you have access to stores and daily conveniences, strong public transit, etc., for the first time. And it really represents a move away from a lot of ideas that we now consider to have been ill-informed. So it'll be possible again to rebuild exactly the kind of neighborhoods that are being restored in other parts of the city along streets like William. So I'd love to talk to you more about that history. It's a fascinating, in some ways, a very dark chapter in Buffalo's history.
My undergrad degree, which I finished years ago, was actually studying intentional communities or communes, if you're more familiar with that, but also looking at how those kind of, for some, those old hippie communities could teach something to urban planning and intentional kind of communities within there. So I spent a lot of time thinking about back then and to this day about the importance of setting up neighborhoods to promote community. And some of the stuff that was mentioned earlier, the mixed-use development, all of those kind of things are essential. And Dean Shibley talked about Larkinville and how Larkin, I think first of all, foremost, recognizing that there have been people living there and for however long. So there are people that were living there downtown. But what Larkinville did do was bring in services and employment and places for those people to work, and it brought in the mixed use to the people. Now, what I think is critical, and we can look at some of the organizations around Buffalo now that are really stepping up and kind of making things happen, in addition to who we've got on the panel today. I would point to some of the community benefit agreement work that was being done. I believe it was Coalition for Economic Justice. That was a couple years ago. I don't know what's going on with that right now. But, again, organizing people power to step up and, and make the policymakers pay attention in terms of, we deserve to get jobs that are established within our community. So once we get the Larkinvilles, or once we get whatever those mixed use services are into those neighborhoods, whenever we do the development that brings the walkable neighborhood and that brings more kind of economic vitality to a neighborhood, we make sure that the people that were there get those jobs. I think number one, that is really, really essential. So the community benefits agreement process, which has happened around in other areas around the country, I think the Evergreen cooperatives, some of those different movements are really powerful and important to look at. I would also mention the participatory budgeting work that's going on right now that Clean Air Coalition just did recently regarding the money that they got from the town of Wanacoke, I believe. So I'm only paying attention to these things peripherally, but I'm with you in terms of your interest and how to make sure that development stays with the people. So.
I want to go back to a point made by the young man over there who's not in the room now.
It's outside.
Tell Paul to come in here. He's right there.
I think we're, as a region, heading in the right direction with citizen action and policy change. But the rub is what he was pointing out. We have to head to a place where there is a system in place in our governance structure where people can have a voice in the implementation of these ideas, especially for this, the dollar sign. So several years ago, there was a law passed about allocating a proportion of the budget for the arts at the county level. Anybody remember this? Yeah. And that really made a difference. And so I'm going to throw out a perhaps crazy idea, which is that every time development or redevelopment happens in the city of Buffalo, in Erie County, Niagara County, that we should have a mechanism to gauge the impact of that development or redevelopment on our food in a monetary way, and if it is impacted negatively, to recoup that into public coffers to support a stronger food system.
I think I'm going to go with the flow and also address Paul. So all our comments are going to be towards Paul. I also think that he, along with the board member from CEJ, raised really the crucial fundamental question about: are we going to get organized as a people? Are we going to be able to articulate what we need as communities? Are we going to put the structures in place to achieve that? And I think the jury's out. Like, obviously, the energy in this room is the starting point. Getting everyone in this room organized. But you have to focus that energy on particular issues that you win and then help you build a structure over time. So I'll just end by saying there's some really hopeful things on the horizon. I think if folks haven't heard about Open Buffalo, that's a coalition, a new initiative around some of the very questions we've been raising, especially around what we call high road economic development, where if there are huge public resources going into something like the medical school or the airport or wherever the public money is going, that we need citizen-based processes to set some standards, to say that there need to be local jobs, there need to be living wage jobs, there needs to be sustainability built into the plan, whether it's food or water, stormwater. We're only going to achieve that if we get everyone in this room involved, so keep your eyes open for Open Buffalo, and I think we'll be moving ahead.
I wanted to bring up a common saying that is no longer common, which is that you can't fight City Hall. When was the last time you've heard that phrase used? But I think it was much more common 50 or 60 years ago, when very large decisions like the adoption of a new zoning code or the demolition of a significant neighborhood was inevitable, and that there was nothing that you as citizens could do about it. The decision had been made in a back room, and that's just the way it's going to be. You can't fight City Hall. Well, you can't say that anymore, because I think that we have a very different view now of how citizens are engaged in this planning process. When a zoning code was adopted in 1953, very few conversations with everyday people were made. And I think today, and one of the positive things in this group here is a very fine example of it, is that citizens are now in the driver's seat and are driving the conversation. So that's a wonderful thing. It's I think a hallmark of a very new and different way of approaching the planning of our city and region.
I really think with the word sustainability, it really starts with the young people. So it really starts young. MAP does it right. They teach young kids how to do all the farming and stuff and urban farming, and to really keep that conversation going and to keep that like tradition going, it just teach the young people, and hopefully it can be passed on down. And yeah.
Thanks.
Mentioned that he's been in urban planning for 48 years. I took a picture. So I just wanted to just point out that, like, beyond that, I mean, so this place making and the, really finding places that work and designing places that work. I mean, there's whole cultures and communities of people who are very based in the land and in the place where they are. We've got the Iroquois Nation right next door to us, and Native American cultures who've been strongly committed to that. But there's also just people within our own communities who, like the story of Jen McCosey and her husband, who are very committed to their communities, or the people who spoke up. Again, from Central Park Plaza, and people who have been in their neighborhoods and rooted in their places for a long time. So I just want to give props to the Run Region Forward efforts and the Green Code efforts in terms of involving those people. And I think I've been involved now with 3 different citizen engagement processes that the Urban Design Project has done, from the Environmental Alliance Congresses, to the Green Code, to now One Region Forward, and it's been really, it's felt really good to know that there is organizations, and I mentioned those others, CEJ, Clean Air Coalition, and we heard from PUSH, that are intentionally involving people and finding ways of making sure that people's voices are included. I do want to push back and encourage that, piggybacking on what Lamar said, I would encourage One Region Forward perhaps consider doing a youth congress, that there are many diverse youth, young voices, and they're with their own issues that are critical to them in terms of these aspects. So finding more ways to make sure that we are bringing all the people from our communities into the fold and recognizing their voices. But again, thank you, and thank you for inviting us to be part of the panel.
Thank you, Rebecca. Colleagues, it's been a terrific conversation, as had the last 2. And again, it's terrific because of the back and forth that we get from the kind of provocative pieces that get put out. So I thank you all for that. I want to go back to Samina's opening remarks about how we wrote a comp plan and it didn't say anything about food. Same is true for about 164 others in our region relative to the planning we've done. It wasn't part of the lexicon. Samina wasn't at the table shouting about food at the time we wrote that piece. We've been hearing things. That's what it's about. That's how we evolve. I want to also say that the comp plan said do a zoning code and do it in a participatory way. So we could bring it into a kind of conceptual base that is really driven by the voices of the communities affected by it. When we did the downtown plan, we said, oh, holy mackerel, we got to fix the building code. I spent 5 years, I'll never get back, in Albany on the Building Code Council, completely reconstructing our code to make it amenable to exactly the zoning we did next. That family of activities are part of the value of planning. So least you imagine I've given up on planning based on my opening remarks. I'm there, I believe in it. But it's got to be part of a much longer conversation, and you can't let them do it, whoever they are, by themselves. And what we're doing now is organizing to address just that. Please thank this panel and yourself.